Hello humans, it's just Martine, and today we're going to be going over my February reading statistics. I have my computer here with me, so if I'm looking at it, I wouldn't know my statistics without it. Let's jump straight into it. According to my spreadsheet, I finished 31 books in the month of February with a total number of 9,186 pages. Just to pull up my Bookly statistics to show how many pages I actually read this month in comparison to what that says, it's actually a lot closer this month than last month. Bookly says I read 9,078 pages. Only about 100-page difference there between what my spreadsheet thinks I read and what Bookly says that I read, because Bookly, again, is tracking those books that I'm still in the middle of at the end of the month. So I read lots of pages from those books that don't get counted towards my monthly total in the spreadsheet, but it's just something to note that they were closer together this time, which is good. And also Bookly says that I read for a total of 103 hours in the month of February. That's more than 4 whole days of reading. Now, looking specifically at my spreadsheet, based on the total number of pages that it says that I read, that 9,186, I have an average pages per day of 328.07, which is pretty good, but it is about 20 pages lower than January's average page count. That's fine because the number of pages total read in January was so inflated on this spreadsheet compared to my Bookly hours, so that's all good. It makes sense, but yeah, 328 about per day. But my average page count was way lower, probably also for the same reason that I didn't finish a 1,400 page book in the month of February. So my average page count for each book was 296.32, so under 300, and I will admit I read lots of short books this month. Compared to January, yeah, that's like almost a 30-page difference in my average length of book. My most read genre was adventure because I had 2 Magic Tree House books per usual, but then I also started rereading a series of unfortunate events and I didn't know how else to classify that, so I put it as adventure, which is probably horribly wrong, but that's what I did anyway. To me, this is also marking like a certain brand of children's or middle grade book, so there's that. That was my most read genre, but I read lots of other genres, so it's not like the majority of my reading for the month was those children's books. Out of my 31 books, 15 had representation of some kind, whether from the author or characters in the story, so almost 50%, which is pretty good. I had read from 15 of these authors before. This is probably inflated by Lemony Snicket. Everything else I think I have a pie chart for, so let's just jump straight into looking at the charts because I think they're more fun than me just like telling you numbers. So for our genre pie, it's looking pretty diverse just like last time, but there are, I think, 3 big chunks. There's nonfiction, adventure, and sci-fi. Looking at last month, there is a difference there where I read significantly less romance this month than in January, which is interesting, and also less contemporaries and mysteries. Adventure and nonfiction were both pretty high up their categories for me last month too, but sci-fi was at just 12%, and it's bumped up this month to 16.7%, which is fun because I love sci-fi, with romance only making up 10%. That's an 8% decrease from last month, which is crazy. And then, a bunch of other stuff. I did finish 1 classic, I think, so that's the 3.3%. I also had trouble categorizing a lot of these this month, so like my 1 magical realism book, like I probably should have just marked as fantasy, but it wasn't really fantasy, so I added magical realism. I didn't know how to feel about it. I did read 1 poetry book, 1 horror book, 1 contemporary book. Again, a lot of these are hard to exactly pin down on the spreadsheet, so I did my best. But the main takeaway is like adventure and nonfiction are still pretty far up there for me, but then the other top genre this month was sci-fi, which I'm pleased with because I prefer sci-fi to romance, so I'm glad that that's higher than romance. Now, looking at book size, if you combine medium and large, that's about 50%, which I'm happy with, but this small number is so big, and I get it. I love reading small books. It just makes me feel some type of way looking at this and being like, you read so many small books. It makes me feel like my reading doesn't count in some way, which is so silly. Like, it totally does. But yeah, 48.4% small books, which is under 300 pages. Medium books, again, 45.2%, which is 300 to 500 pages. No books over 800 pages this month. I rarely ever read a book over 800 pages, but I did get a couple of large books in there. I think 2. I am pleased that I read at least 1 large book this month, because I think that was my greatest fear with reading all the small books, was that I wouldn't read any large ones, so avoided there. But I would like to kick up the medium maybe a little and bring down the small. We'll see though. This next month, I'm not hopeful for it though, because it's the month where we read 4 Magic Tree House books, and I also want to finish my reread of A Series of Unfortunate Events, books 5 through 13. So like 12 small books already accounted for basically, which is, woo, that's, you know, that's a high number, and that's not all the small books I'm going to read. So next month I'm going to have to work really hard if I want any balance between medium and small. For star ratings, we had quite a spread. I think my lowest in January was a 2-star. No, I didn't have any 2 stars. My lowest in January was a 2.5, but I had 1 2.5 stars, 2 2 stars, and 1 1.5 stars, so it was like a little lower. The majority of my pie is still 4 stars, which is good, and if you combine 5 stars, 4.5, 4, and then 3.5, that's still over half, so I'm really enjoying still over half the books I'm reading, which is good. But I am sad to see that those tinier ratings are coming through. For series versus standalone, it's primarily standalone. 19 of the books that I read this month were standalones, and those series, a lot of them are accounted for by Series of Unfortunate Events and Magic Tree House, although I did catch up on 1 series this month, so that's good. And the companion was This Winter by Alice Oseman. Specifically looking at this chart for series versus standalones, I started 4 series, read 7 series continuations, didn't finish any series, and caught up with 1. This next month is Squash That series, so hopefully that should help a little with my series reading. For age range, in spite of all the children's books I read, they only made up 22.6% of my pie, which is good. Again, I'm going to have to work pretty hard in March to keep that consistent, where I'm reading primarily adult books. I even increased the percentage of adult books that I read this month to 61.3%, where it was 57.6% last semester. That's probably not a significant difference, but I did notice it. But where that mainly came from is the YA section, so my children's part of the pie is larger than last month, but my YA is significantly smaller. For author gender, about half written by women. This is pretty typical for me. I don't think there's anything much of interest to dig into there, except maybe books written by men went up a little, but that's about it. For format, I largely read ebooks, especially because my library absolutely reigns supreme, which you'll see in my acquired pie in a little bit, but 54.8% of the books I read this month were ebooks. That's compared to 36.4% in January, so that's a pretty big growth, I would say. In January, it was almost an even third split between the 3 formats. That is not the case this month. I barely read any audiobooks, which is interesting. I did a pretty good job reading physically though, and I absolutely smashed the ebooks. So reading 10 physical books in a month is pretty good, except that not all of them were owned physical books, so we'll get there in a second. But 17 ebooks is just a lot, and only 4 audiobooks. For publication date, mostly backlist, although that did go down by about 2 percentage points from January, and my new release category went up a bit because I've been reading some arcs for NetGalley this month, so that did change a bit. I took it from last year and put it to new release, basically. Acquired is where we get a little frisky, because for a while in February, I was only reading library books, like only finishing library books. There's this huge tract of books in my February list that just says like library, like 8 library books in a row on my spreadsheet, which was just ridiculous. So library books absolutely ate it this month. 15 library books, and that's a combination of physical library books from my school library and ebooks and audiobooks from Libby. I thought about tracking those things separately, but this spreadsheet already has a lot going on, so at least for right now I'm keeping library together, and I'll mainly know the difference by how many physical books I read in a month versus ebooks. 3 of the books I read this month were owned ebooks, which is good because last month there were none, and I have so many owned ebooks I need to get through some of them. 3 NetGalley books, which is only 1 more than January, but I also read some new releases from the library, which is why that number probably went up. 6 owned books, which is not bad. It's 1 less than January, and I'd like it to be a bit higher than that, but we're working on it. And then other refers to many different things. So it could be books I shouldn't have access to, or it could be books that somebody lent to me and I read and gave back. The 48.4% library is so much. But then I look at my January graph and it was 63.6% library. So I actually did better not reading from the library this month. More than half of it was not library books, which was not the case last month. And I just need to say that to like give myself perspective. So I did like a pretty good job reading owned books. I think I actually, yeah, I read a higher percentage of owned books this month than last month between all the different categories. So it's actually better than I thought it was. And I'm not going to try to decrease that like 50% library reading because I do most of my reading from the library and it's fine. But I do want my owned books to go up. So one would say that necessitates taking the library ones down, but we'll just see what happens. I think those are the main statistics of any interest. So that was my reading month in February. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below how was your reading month in February, and subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!